Hey, this is David with No Chaser. And for today's topic, I'm going to talk about an idea in alcoholism and addiction that it's not very novel. I mean, it's not something unheard of, but it's about how things escalate. And when I talk about things, I'm talking about like patterns of behavior. So there is a famous quote in the book The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, who was a famous alcoholic. So I thought it was kind of apropos. And the two characters are talking about bankruptcy, I believe, and one of them, I don't remember the character's name or anything like that. I don't even know if I actually like fully read the book. But anyways, one of the character asks him how bankruptcy happens, and the other character replies, "It happens two ways: gradually and then suddenly." I always remember this quote, even if I most likely now think I didn't read the book. But anyways, I always remember this because I thought this as a very good way to explain how things escalate in addiction and alcoholism, how the way that you drink and use drugs, or how you use drugs or how you drink, all that type of stuff. For me, my drugging and especially drinking lasted years, well over a decade. And, even though it was a long amount of time, I just remember when things got kicked up a notch, so to speak, it seems like,
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
that it just happened so quickly. And by like quickly, I mean how quickly that I started doing more drastic or crazier patterns of behavior, and they just became the status quo like right away. Like what made me think about this topic was I was talking to somebody after a meeting, and she was describing how, she was like, I know I'm an alcoholic. I never drank in the morning, never drank at work. I, I checked all the boxes for like all the consequences and problems and stuff that came with, with alcoholism, but I never did a lot of the stuff that you did. And she was kind of referring to me. She wasn't saying it in a judgmental way, but she had heard my story before, and she's like, yeah, I may have had the shakes at work, but I would never drink at work. I would never drink before work. I never drank in the morning. And I thought about it, and there was a long time where when I was drinking, I didn't do that too. But once I did, then it was that from then on, and the decision to kind of do this wasn't like super conscious, it was just, I remember one particular like drinking before work where it was just like a lot of nights I had where even if I went to bed drunk at like 1 a.m., I like just woke up, eyes busting open. I was up at like 4:30 in the morning. Wasn't rested, but just something that like what the, drinking does to your sleep. And I was just like up. So I had time to kill. The withdrawals were starting to come through, and, I was just kind of leaving to work early, and I just realized I just left, and I was like, man, I got a lot of time to kill. It's really bad handshaking, just feeling like garbage, more garbage than normal, which is saying something. I was like, you know what, let me just get, let me get a couple of Smirnoff shooters. I don't even know if the gas station is open, at least the one by my workplace, but let me just check it out. Maybe I'll do it. I don't know. Let me just walk in the gas station. I'll get an energy drink. Maybe I'll get, and I was doing all this bullshit in my head. I really was like focused on getting those shooters, and I drank them, and I was like, all right, this is a one-time deal. There was extenuating circumstances, like, all the rationalization and justification. And I never really planned for that to become a new way of drinking. But boy, let me tell you, that became my new way of drinking. I may have worked a couple days after that where I didn't drink before work, but eventually I did. And like I said, it was the status quo. It was like, we are under new management. We are now a person who drinks before work, and we are never going back. There's kind of like one of those things where if you have the money and you fly first class, you never go back to coach. Like you once you fly first class, you never go back to coach. In kind of this inverse way, because I wouldn't say drinking in the morning before work is flying first class, but in that sense, like you're never going back to coach. Like in my mind, I was like, I'm not, this is the same thing, like I said, not just with drinking, but people who go from, snorting opiates and stuff like that, speed, meth, and they start shooting up. And then at a certain point, they never like plan to, like nobody ever wants to become an intravenous drug user. But once they do that, that's the way it's going to be from now on. whether they wanted to or not, whether they believed it was a one-time thing, that's the way it was going to be. And, I was thinking about this, and yeah, it's that sense of like, for the longest time when I was drinking fully alcoholically, I I wasn't one of those like drinking, in the morning, and I wasn't drinking at work or anything like that or before work. But once I did, that's the way it was. And, some of those things make more sense. Like you talk about the person where when I was doing drugs, which was opiates, I never got to the stage, very close, but I never got to the stage of shooting up. And I was grateful I did, because I just knew I was no different than anybody else. Once I hit that level, it was going to be that way from then on. It's not like I made a choice and I used some sort of prudent moderation for it. I just turned over to drinking. But I knew, like, at a certain point, that once I started escalating like certain behaviors, like how far I would go to sneak drinking, like would I actually come into work, like maybe I drink on my lunch break, but now am I actually going to bring like a water bottle filled with vodka in work, in my locker or at my desk or whatever the case may have been? Am I really going to do that? Once I did it, and here's the big thing, and got away with it, then it's off to the races. Like that's just like, I would say for me and a lot of people I know, that whole doing it and getting away with it sets a new tone for how things are going to be done. And, I think there's a lot of debate about like how addiction starts, how alcoholism, if it's in genes or if it's related to mental illness or traumatic experiences, upbringing. I mean, all that stuff kind of, it works together, but I'm kind of the school of thought where it is a sort of mind virus where it can come into your life and it can come into your way of being in many different avenues. But once it does, it hijacks it. And so like at a certain point, it's almost irrelevant of how it got there, because once it got there, and you have the predilection to be an addicted person, it's taking over. And part of that takeover is this very thing where once you kind of break the seal of something to a way that escalates, whether you're doing more or whether you're doing it more often or whether you're doing it in more risky or dangerous ways. But once it feeds into that ultimate sense of addiction of the just more and more, you can't go back. I mean, for the most part, of course, I hate that I always kind of have to put this caveat to everything. Like, of course, every journey to recovery and an addiction is different, and there's always outliers. But what I've known with most people is that there's never really a going back once you've either started drinking in the morning, once you've shot up, once you've started the things you might do to get drugs or to get alcohol, like all these things, whether it's just like the chemicals you ingest or the actions that you take. Once you do these things, it kind of like, people talk about how they cross lines they never thought they'd cross. Well, the whole thing is why that's awful. It's not because you're hitting a sort of new low. It's because once that line is crossed, you've broken the will to uphold that. Like, especially if we're talking about like morals, where you're talking about any sort of self-worth. Like, I'd never be a person that drank at work. There's this thing like psychologically that once it's done, once you've done that thing, it's easy to like swirl in some self-pity and to swirl in self-hatred and also just to like rationalize things where you go, well, what's the point now? Like, I've already done it. Like, I'm not going to hold myself to this higher standard. I'm going to lower my expectations. And it's so silly to think of like, what's the point? What's the point of never doing it again? The point of never doing it again in a normal mind is that it's bad for you. Like in a non-addicted sense, if I ate like half an ice cream cake just on some random Sunday, and I'd never done that before, in my mind, I wouldn't think, well, it was kind of gross and I feel sick and it's way too much calories and sugar and it's awful. It's kind of fun as I was doing it, but I never thought I'd do that. But now that I have, I'm going to do this every Sunday. In fact, I'm going to start doing this every day. Like, no, you wouldn't think that way, but that's because I'm not addicted to doing that thing. If you're addicted to doing that thing and you start to, whether it's like consciously or not, you push your boundaries and you make a sort of choice to push it further and to go above and beyond what you were normally expecting, because it feeds into that, because it's now a new avenue to get more or to do it more or to like have it more frequently or to get away with it, or whether just to keep up the life of being able to drink. We talk about, I'm not just talking about like how much you drink or when you drink, but I'm talking about the things you do to get away with it, the hiding, the sneaking, or again, with drugs or alcohol, the things you're willing to, like shoplifting or stealing money or all that type of stuff. Like, honestly, like the way I think about like my years of drinking and using drugs, it was never that I did these things. Like if you think of it as a timeline, it was never that I did these things kind of like towards the beginning, in the middle, some towards the end. No, it was all like a trajectory of going up or down, however you want to look at it. And it was exponential. It was just more and more and more. And once I broke that line, once I lowered my self-worth and self-esteem, it was just go, 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 go. So I'm sorry, by the way, if I'm also kind of raspy or like I've had this sore throat, but I know I needed to put out one of these videos, but excuse me. Anyways, so the thing is that, and you see this a lot in like what happens with relapse, where when people relapse, they may not like start immediately. They may not start immediately where they left off. Some do, but it goes right back to that very quickly. It goes right back to it and then some. I recently had a friend who had passed away. He was a guy who used to use opiates like way back in the day, and he unfortunately died not too long ago. And it was like with a lot of my friends that this had happened to. It was not that they were just using drugs for a long period of time and then it just got him once. It was because he had sobriety and he was clean, and then he had relapsed. And it just, I know with, fentanyl is just a monster out there. And I know there are so many dangers, but there's especially so many dangers if a person has been clean for a long time and then they go back. Because even if they hadn't been using the drugs or drinking, in that time that they were clean and sober, obviously, it's just something happens in your mind where it clicks over and all those things come back. All the patterns of behavior, all the, I don't know what you want to call it, like how high or low you were in the things you were doing to get or to do drugs. Your mind, it's almost like once you do that drug or drink again, it's almost like your brain is taken out and a different one is put in. And then everything that's bad is put on the table again. And, it's terrifying. It's one of the many terrifying things of relapse. But, I talked about this because, it's something that came up, and I think a lot of people may not, understand it, like about how or why, especially that addicts and alcoholics act the way they do, or like how they can do these things. And it's one of those things that, again, it's not that you make choices and you go, I'm now going to be a person who shoots up. Like that's the way things, you kind of fall into it. But once you do and your brain is hijacked and it's held captive, anything goes in a very bad way. Anyways, hope your new year is going well for you. Hopefully I can feel a little bit better. I've been sick all year. Terrible joke. Sorry. Apologies. But I hope things are going well. If you're struggling, keep at it. Stay strong. I hope there's hope for you. If there doesn't seem like there is light, just give it a try, man. I know things can seem so bleak, but you might, I don't know, you might as well try to give it a shot if you can, or at the very least, just try to be as safe as possible. If things are going well for you, or if you're on the straight but shaky path, I commend you and I wish the best for you, and just everybody else, be well.